definitely one of the things that we were thinking of when we started this project was kind of like discernment, like helping there be the vocabulary to discern, because a lot of the time it's people like marketing the same stuff to each other in the same words, and it's like, well, you can't just go to Cambo one day and then 5-MeO the next and then a peyote ceremony at the weekend. Well, I mean, you can, but also
I was eating like a steak taco and like drinking a beer a couple of years ago, and this woman came up and asked me if I wanted to join this bufo ceremony. So when? She's like, in about 20 minutes. I'm like, what's out of your mind? Like, there's cheese dripping from the thing that I'm holding. I mean,
yeah, what happened to preparation? Yeah, I think that's kind of I don't know if it's a necessary growing pain for the larger psychedelic community, but it's definitely something to watch out for. I think there's kind of a burgeoning culture of those chasing peak experience. You know, maybe their intentions are in a good place, but I think that the wisdom of kind of pausing and seeking attention and being methodical and, slowing it down a little bit is kind of getting lost,
completely.
Yeah.
I suspect that in my kind of more psychedelically evangelical days, when you sort of first discover this, and it's like, oh my God, this is awesome. Like, you need to try this. It's once about 5 or 6 of those had gone like really wrong, I just stopped recommending it to anybody.
Yeah, let it call you. I think let it call you. Yeah, the older I get, the less of a zealot I become. I think, ask me 20 years ago, I was much more of a zealot than I am now. I just take a much more sort of kind of dharmic approach to it. If it's your path, it's your path. If it finds you, it finds you, but I don't preach as much as I used to, I think.
Word dharmic was a really interesting one there, because I was just about to ask you, do you think that your movement into meditation and kind of gravitation towards spiritual pathways that had origins outside of psychedelia has kind of come with some tempering to the attitude that you may have started out with?
I think so, definitely. I think the more, the more I kind of found myself firmly rooted in kind of a spiritual discipline, which is something, by the way, it took me a long time to cultivate that, because I am not a disciplined person at all. My work ethic and, just the very idea of discipline was something that I really had to learn how to cultivate. And when I kind of incorporated that into a spiritual tradition or path, just kind of opened my sphere of, my vibrational sphere around what Dharma is. And Dharma is the path of attraction. And it's also the path of omission, stripping away what doesn't work for you. Just as much as it is incorporating what does work for you, And as far as the psychedelics go, I see psychedelics just as kind of a stop along the path, but not the path itself. When used wisely and constructively and with intent and a certain degree of centeredness, I think it can be a very useful tool to accelerate your path. But I don't think it's the path in and of itself. In the same way, I don't think psychedelics are a method in and of themselves, because it's not sustainable. You can't, it's not a daily practice. It's a great thing to drop into now and then. But because kind of following that balance is that's the call. And that's also the challenge too, I think.
Has your relationship with discipline changed then?
Oh my God. So much so. So much so. It's interesting being asked that, because, I grew up, my dad had this incredible sense of discipline, incredible work ethic. Unbelievable. Now looking back on it all these years, he was so self-aware of the work that he was doing, that it was important. And every day, he'd be sitting at his computer and just writing and writing and writing and, always generating ideas and always just in that flow. And never had any, he never really seemed to, at least talk about it anyway, but any self-doubt or anything like that, or any really distraction. He just was in it. And I think when growing up, seeing that, it was so intimidating for me that I sort of went the other way for a long time. Struggled with substance abuse for a long time. And then I did find myself in, a pretty kind of traditional kind of corporate America sort of environment for a while, which, I look back on that as, that was not my path, but it did instill kind of a level of discipline, instill a level of structure. Like you show up to do a task in kind of a sequential order, and this is how you get something done from start to finish. And looking back on that, I would say, oh, that was valuable, But then when I left that and kind of started dabbling more in spiritual pursuits, fusing all of that together and kind of coming up with an idea of like, hey, what does a spiritual practice look like? And how do you do that? Like that sounds cool, but how do you do that? How does one do that? And the learning to do that definitely gave me an idea of how discipline works in my life. And also when I'm avoiding discipline, when I'm seeking distractions, like you guys over WhatsApp, you were talking about tech addiction. And that is definitely like a great example to me of something that can turn into a distraction that takes me away from discipline,
It's fascinating that sort of corporate office job is your rebellion in some ways. That's really it's really interesting.
Is that what it felt like even at the time?
It didn't feel like rebellion so much as it felt like identity, searching for identity. The most difficult.
And searching outside the kind of the niche and the nest that you'd come from, it was a deliberate kind of jump onto another lily pad.
Exactly. No, that's exactly right, Ross. I mean, it was, this is, the most difficult thing about when my dad passed was that I didn't know who I was. I had no idea. Growing up and, until he died, I was just orbiting around that sun, in that universe. And I had no idea who I was. And so I thought at the time, exactly like, hey, well, I think the best thing to do is to get as far away from that world as possible. So it went that direction. And it had its uses, but ultimately, it ran its course, I think, more of kind of, yeah.
It is like, it's the task of all of us, right? As soon as we're born, it's to sort of like learn, like, to be a separate entity, right? And sort of everyone has this struggle. And I mean, we're in our early 30s, and I think our 20s for both of us were kind of defined by, trying to be a contrast to our families. And then we just start talking about just the odd character traits where we're like, oh wow, that's actually really similar to
they just pop up and speak through you all the time. Collectively, yes.
But imagining sort of what that's like when there's a name, it's like a brand. It's like a whole just concept that's.
Yeah, but it's sort of the same thing, right? I mean, I think everybody shares kind of a similar kind of notion is that, oh my God, I don't want to end up like my parents. Right? Like, everyone kind of shares that. And I did too, and and now there are certain parts of my parents, like, I don't want to end up like, but for the most part, it's like, oh yeah, they did a lot of great things, and embracing that and trying, why was I trying so hard to get away from that? Asking myself that, why was I trying so hard to push all of that away? I'm still trying to figure that out. I don't know.
Was there a kind of defining moment or a series of defining moments before, for instance, you started to create the Maps podcast, where you started to really feel like, now I'm ready to embrace this much more than I had been, and like pivotal realizations that brought you to that place?
Yes, there were actually a couple of very specific moments. One, as I was sort of ending my corporate career, the last iteration of that, I was working in the music business, doing what I've always been doing, but which was like digital marketing and strategy. But I ended up in the music business, and for 5 years, and about year 3.5 of that, I realized I was very unhappy, and I started rediscovering yoga, meditation, things that I was introduced to when I was a teenager, and started kind of cultivating that and developing interest in it. And I reintroduced myself to psychedelics as well after a 9-year break, and realized that I was just on this path of realizing that I was not doing what I wanted to do. I was kind of living a life by default. So that was kind of the first half. And then the second moment was I went to go visit Ram Dass, who I hadn't visited. I hadn't seen him in about 4 or 5 years since he moved to Maui. And I was sitting in his living room one morning at dawn. I was the first one up because of the time difference in Hawaii. And I just had this moment sitting in his living room alone that, the vision that I had, his living room was also like a big puja room. It's very extravagant and amazing. And I was watching the Hawaiian sun come up, and I had this vision of seeing myself at 80 years old, wondering where my life had gone, wondering, and seeing that I never lived the things that I wanted to live. I never did the things that I wanted to do. And I just had this moment that was kind of like a lightning bolt. And then spending the next 10 days with Ram Dass kind of helped to put that into clarity, maybe not so much action, because it took a while to kind of generate, like how I was going to make this work. I just had a kind of a vague idea. But I was like what I was saying earlier, like the path of Dharma is sometimes, I think, just as much about stripping away what isn't working. And, until you uncover something that feels right, until you're kind of your heart and your soul feeling in alignment. And hey, this feels okay, But that was the beginning. Yeah, those were the seeds.
I know the answer to this in some respect, but what was so extraordinary about Ram Dass to you?
I'll start by saying when I spent time with Ram Dass when I was a kid and a teenager, he terrified me, absolutely terrified me. I was so nervous around him all of the time, because I thought like this guy, I kind of thought it was like a shtick. I thought he was like making it up. Like, who could just like beam that way?
So were you kind of always waiting for the moment when he wouldn't be like that, and you'd finally be kind of proven right that it was a shtick?
Exactly.
Did he know that you were skeptical?
Well, I think so, because it was always hard for me to really have a conversation with him. Like, I could last like 5 minutes, and somebody who kind of makes that kind of eye contact with you and just beams and looks into your soul and just really taps in, like, when you're 16 years old, that's terrifying. And you've never been around anyone like that. And I loved him at the same time, and was reading Be Here Now and thought that was cool, but just being in his presence was really, really, really difficult. And then when I kind of came full circle and brought him back into my life, I realized, look, Ram Dass certainly had his humanity, and, and I spent a lot of time with him, definitely saw sides where he was just a guy, getting angry and annoyed and, all of the normal things humans do. But, for the most part, that cultivation of unconditional love was a real thing. And for him, that was his practice. How can I cultivate unconditional love for others, letting them know that they are safe and that there is a force field of love for them to experience too. And once I realized that was true, that's what he was like, that was his mission.
I think it's more to his credit if you do still get angry and annoyed sometimes, because if you don't feel any of those emotions anymore, then you're not doing anything difficult, really.
Yeah, exactly. And he would call it phony holy, never be phony holy, and he would give me that advice all the time, especially when I started doing psychedelic facilitation work early on. I would get mentored by him, and he would say, one of the first things he said to me is never be phony holy, never pretend to be something you're not, and share the mess just as much as you share the love,
Yeah. I think a lot of that is adaptability in one's language as well, because when there's sort of certain teachers and they're kind of using this vernacular.
Yeah, so like when you look at retreat descriptions and there's this immediate like claim that you'll be brought into oneness with yourself, but it's the retreat itself is kind of sitting outside that way of talking. So you're just a secular person who's never encountered this language before and is just trying to consider a psychedelic retreat for the first time. And it adds this additional layer of inaccessibility, which you must be so familiar with in descriptions in all of these different outfits that you've interviewed on your podcasts, and also retreats within the meditation and spiritual sector as well, when something's genuine, and then when something's maybe not so genuine but has good language, and then I guess there's also when something is genuine but the language is obscuring the fruits because it's being used in an accessible way. Have you found a way to kind of work through language to always find the good things behind it?
There was a great Swami, his name was Swami Vivekananda, who was an Indian Swami, but he came to America to introduce the West to Vedanta. And he was a disciple of Ramakrishna. And he came to America and started the Vedanta temples in the 20s through the 40s. And his name is Swami Vivekananda. And I only learned this a few years ago. And I spent a lot of time at the Vedanta Temple in Hollywood. Vivekananda, Viveka means discernment in Sanskrit. There's actually a word for discernment in Sanskrit. And Ananda means bliss. So his name is the bliss of discernment. Swami, the bliss of discernment. And that's sort of the answer to the question, right? Is how do we cultivate discernment? And that's a really, really tricky one. I mean, I know how I do it, and maybe, how you guys might do it. But I think the problem is for people who are maybe newer to things like, say, psychedelics or spiritual retreats, or being kind of promised an expectation or reward that is perhaps too grandiose or something like that. So how do you
reset? Like, I think that can be a really
how do you read between the lines? How do you read between the lines and find out, who is offering an expression of authenticity or who is offering an expression of, I don't know, motive or agenda or profit, right? I don't know. I don't really know the answer to that. I just know that it's challenging.
Is that something that you're going to be exploring more in your book?
Yeah, I do a little bit, for sure. I mean, especially in relationship to the medicalized model of psychedelics and exploring how I see the pros and cons of the medical model. I mean, as you guys know, and, being part of the UK psychedelic scene and breaking convention and all of the things, in the last few years, especially, the medicalization model / the mental health model has become so inextricably linked with psychedelic healing. There are some good sides to that for sure, but there are also a lot of really downsides, right? And
sure.
Yeah. And I think the essence of that is, like, first of all, I have to say up front that the DNA, the core spirit and DNA of the psychedelic experience is to have a mystically oriented transformational experience, right? So how do you juxtapose that within late stage capitalism? How does that work? And, some people will say, well, it doesn't. And I wouldn't go that far because it's happening, so we have to learn to make friends with it, like it or not, because it is happening. But I do see, I see a lot of problems, and some of them are already kind of bubbling up here and there. Psychedelics can be a very profitable institution. Even when somebody might have the right intentions in mind, if profit comes first, if business comes first, then I think the core DNA, like I mentioned before, gets lost. And secondarily, too, I think if the general kind of public at large starts perceiving psychedelics as, first and foremost, it being a clinical experience, then I don't think we've done our job as a community. And and I think it's worth talking about, because I do think there have been some upsides to the medical model for sure. It's given us a tremendous amount of data and research, and changed the way we think about safety and the narratives, all the the false narratives around psychedelics, and it's helped populations that otherwise maybe wouldn't have been helped, like veterans and first responders and trauma survivors and things like that. And that's all great, but I do worry that if we start kind of turning psychedelics into a kind of a cattle call, sort of like ketamine clinics. Take, for example, right? There are many good ketamine clinics out there, for sure. Many good ketamine-assisted therapists. But there are a lot of ketamine clinics that are just, sterile, in and out, hook you up to the IV, leave the room, next, and rinse and repeat. And I think, we're taking care of people's psyches and their transformation here. And that requires a lot of care,
Yeah. So much there. What are your thoughts on ketamine? I was going to ask you something else, but
my thoughts on ketamine.
Please come back severally to everything you've just said, and thank you for such a beautiful answer.
With the whole sort of ketamine clinic thing, I sort of go through phases of feeling really quite skeptical and kind of cynical even about the whole thing.
I share that.
Particularly with ketamine telemedicine, which in fact, I guess, loops in a hybridized element of what we were talking about before with technology addiction and technology being helpful for some things, but not others. But ketamine telemedicine's bad combination, in my opinion. What do you think?
Start at the beginning. Let's look at ketamine by definition. Ketamine is not a psychedelic. It's not an entheogen. It's an anesthetic dissociative that under lower doses elicits psychedelic properties. So that's just by medical definition, right? So let's just start there. That implies to me, I think one reason why ketamine is so popular is because it's legal, right? Because it's already been in the pipeline of legality and regulation and administration, right? So I don't think it's the real thing. That said, I know countless people who have experienced tremendous benefit from it, especially those who are, I don't know how to say it, but maybe, they're going through a serious mental health relapse or something, and they're pretty close to the edge, and we don't want them to tip off the edge. And ketamine can be a very powerful tool to come back from the edge, to reset, and kind of, dissolve a lot of the somatic and energetic trauma that's kind of keeping us from being our best selves. And it can be effective at that, for sure.
Can I jump in there with a quick question?
Yeah.
Because part of me feels like that there's an intrinsic value to just variety in your consciousness, and that basically anything that was a radically different state of consciousness would interrupt you in the same way, like a big roller coaster. I mean, not necessarily that, but that's what I keep coming back to. And I don't know, like, I'm willing to have my mind changed, but that's what it feels like.
I love that. I mean, anything we can do to induce non-ordinary states of consciousness, it's a good thing. Ketamine, breath work, float tanks, tantra, anything, like anything that can help us, pierce the veil and shed light on kind of, as Terence McKenna said, whatever you think reality is, that's not it. And the way that we discover what it isn't is by inducing non-ordinary states of consciousness. The ancient yogis and seers and sages of ancient India and Tibet and Thailand, Cambodia, all those places, they knew that, they knew that you had to tap into a non-ordinary state of consciousness to really see how your incarnation is manifesting at this moment in time. And ketamine can be a very powerful tool to do that, I think, for sure. Yeah. I mean, that, and then it does lead me to, the other half of it, which I do think it's kind of a law of diminishing returns, I think the more you do it, the less you'll get out of it. But, early on, yeah, it certainly can be helpful. That said, say if all of a sudden some psilocybin, if magic mushrooms had the same legal status as ketamine did tomorrow, and mushroom clinics started popping up, I would tell people to go there and don't go to the ketamine clinic, go to the mushroom clinic,
I thought it was a really beautifully phrased and very careful definition that you gave, that it's a dissociative anesthetic but can induce psychedelic states at low doses, because I think that can be the problem, is when someone keeps going back to something which was helpful once, and then, as you said, it's this lure of diminishing returns. And the question that I have is to go back to the phrase that you used about it being in the DNA of of psychedelics, that they give you this mystical experience. Do you think that is sufficiently in the DNA of psychedelics, that they can disrupt corruption inherent in capitalist attempts to roll them out? And do you think that there's an innate property in the substances themselves that means that it won't go exactly as planned and it will all be better than some people fear, because the psychedelics kind of have it in hand with this mystical DNA?
That's tough.
Oof. Well,
sorry.
All I could say is I fucking hope so. I hope so. I do. I know, like, for instance, going back to ketamine a little bit, I know so many people who have gone into kind of mid-range ketamine clinics and KO ketamine only clinics, not ketamine assisted therapy. And they leave there going, oh, wow, that was great, but something tells me there's more. And they go on the internet and they discover whatever. They discover maps. They discover us. They discover Michael Pollan's book. They discover Tim Leary or Terence McKenna. And they're like, oh, there is more. Wow, there's so much. And something kind of sparked inside of them to go off and seek, and that there is, in fact, more. And I do. Yeah. I mean, Roz, that's a great sentiment. And I mean, I think it's kind of up to us. It's a choice to believe that or not. I mean, I do think that, I have to think that the more people that turn on and do it with integrity and with authenticity will wake up to, some of the larger problems at hand. Yeah.
But we probably need to act as though we don't fully believe that, so that we do what we can to be creating a container where that's encouraged, right?
Well, I wonder if maybe your hybridization of bringing Buddhism and meditation into what you do, and kind of the other strands that we bring. I wonder if there are, like, many people kind of working on deliberately kind of braiding psychedelics with these other not ostensibly psychedelic things in a way that means that there's a space to craft a container. Is that something that you see your work with meditation doing in parallel? Is it something that you kind of hope to feed directly into the way that people approach psychedelics?
Absolutely. And I do think that there have been a lot of great people out there who kind of are, maybe they play an academic on TV, but in their hearts, they're like, say, take Roland Griffiths. He's a great example, right? I mean, Johns Hopkins is kind of the most traditional medical institution in America, right? But I really believe that he was a mystic hiding out as an academic, and that he knew that I think he agreed with me. The core strand of the experience was to have some kind of mystical transformation, and that in every study that Roland supervised, there was a quality to it that he said cannot be defined, cannot be calculated, cannot be put into a data set. They give people the MEQ, the mystical experience questionnaire, but that doesn't really tell us. I mean, it gives us some insight, but it doesn't tell us too much. And he knew that. And I love that he always said in every study he did, there's a certain element of this that we cannot explain. And I think that is he's a beautiful example of someone who really understands all of these different sensibilities and really was trying to make room for everybody to have a seat at the table. An example of someone, and, and I say this a lot, I usually don't like calling people out specifically, but Compass Pathways, for instance, right? Like, terrible, I mean, it's like, trying
to patent the use of an eye mask.
Huh?
Well, it was Compass, wasn't it, that tried to patent the use of an eye mask as though it was some invention.
They tried to patent set and setting, that the actual act of putting on an eye mask and lying on a couch is a patentable.
Did you have to get involved in reclaiming set and setting as a Leary concept, or was it disproven without you having to kind of tangle with it directly?
I think that was disproven without,
There's enough people using cushions,
Yeah. I mean, it would be like, us trying to patent, like, oh, you put on we have a microphone and we engage over a digital platform and this is a podcast, it's absolutely, it's insane. So, I mean, back to the whole thing. I mean, look, I think eventually though that, psychedelics right now, it's at a fever pitch of change, right? It's at a fever pitch of popularity too. And it may be a fever pitch of hype. And I think once the dust settles, I think things will kind of fall into the places maybe where they're supposed to fall. And I do have faith in that.
Just a quick one about Roland Griffiths and Jung's kins. Do you think that part of their success was because it was framed in a very sort of Christian way, like their playlists? It's a lot of kind of choral music. Was that his inclination anyway? Sort of Roland and Bill Richards, or?
It's a good question. I don't really know. That's a good question.
Because that would have been more palatable, I suspect, to the institution than if they'd been talking about Eastern spirituality, probably.
Yeah, I think so too. I think any small sacrifice that you have to make to sort of appease the bigger institutional burden, I think can be a wise choice. Yeah, but you're right. That's interesting about the playlist. I know it's very popular on Spotify and people use it and share it. I don't really care for it myself, but yeah, you're right.
What's your choice of music if you were to facilitate, or do you ask people what they like?
Well, part of what I do, I mean, it's so subjective. It so depends on the person, and I mean, I kind of DJ throughout, throughout a session. I mean, I have like a starting point and maybe an ending point, but depending on the person and their sensibilities, their cultural sensibilities, I will maybe take some bigger risks than others, I mean, like when I journey, I love, using Aphex Twin Selected Ambient Works Volume 2. It's one of my favorite. Right?
Yeah.
It's to me, it's one of the best. And when I started facilitating, I used that and I found out a lot of people didn't like it. And I was so surprised. It was like, wow, but this is, and
what didn't they like about it?
Too space agey, too alieny, too, a little too electronic, a little too avant-garde for them. But then I also, now I can sort of, I think I'm pretty good at discerning what kind of person I work with would like something like that, and who wouldn't. I worked. My last session I did was a lovely, lovely woman, 70-year-old grandmother. First time, kind of conservative Texas, and
probably not an Aphex Twin fanatic.
No. And we used very, very soft kind of just piano and kind of ambient kind of stuff and flute music. And But yeah, and I love, she was such a sweet lady, so beautiful. But like anytime the music got a little bit too frenetic, it was a challenge for her,
If we came to you, would you veer towards Square Pusher and Aphex Twin?
Probably. I think so. Probably. I would, if you guys came to me, I would definitely push the limits, especially during the peak, starting off slow, but during the peak, really, and some people I work with too, I definitely try to challenge them. And if they feel challenged, I ask them to breathe into it, go with it, breathe into it, see what's on the other side there.
Do the people who come on your facilitation course arrive with quite strong preconceptions about what music they would like to play, or is that kind of something you go through on the course and an open book?
It's what we go through it during the prep phase for sure. When bigger doses are being used, and we're kind of getting towards the heroic side, I do ask them, what music do they love? What's their go-to what's their favorite band, or something like that? Because sometimes that can also be helpful if somebody's having, like, for instance, I had somebody I was working with once who, it was our third session, and the dose got quite large, and he was having a really, really challenging time. And I knew that his favorite album of all time was Sgt. Pepper's. And he was having a really, really, really hard time, and he couldn't ground, he couldn't breathe, and everything that I tried to do with him, it wouldn't work. And I put on Sgt. Pepper's, and it just snapped him right out of it. It just brought him right back to center, So sometimes it can be good to have something kind of in your pocket that can act as a bridge, because music is a really powerful bridge.
Carole King is a good well, it's like
Tapestries.
Tapestries, like home baked brown bread, just sort of.
But how do you feel about words, about lyrics during psychedelic journeys?
I can't hear lyrics anyway. Like I just hear sounds, which is why I'm such a poor lyricist. And last night's song would have been much better if you'd been available.
I will try not to have food poisoning next time you're composing.
Could you?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Well, it was one of those ones where you emerge the other side and feel like reborn. So it was its own psychedelic. I feel like sometimes lyrics in other languages that you don't speak are better for me than when there's a surprise lyric. That, like, I love songs that I know. Beautiful by Carole King. We've had a really nice masculine trip to that, and that's always kind of got like masculine associations in a great way for me. But when I'm like in an experience and there's new lyrics, sometimes I like think about them way too hard. Do you have lots of music with lyrics that you kind of don't understand in other languages deliberately, or do you find that you end up looking up what it means and then you do know it?
Well, I'm part of my spiritual tradition is, mantra music, Sanskrit mantra music. And I drop a lot of that in during sessions, and you know it well enough that you're kind of thinking of the mantra and its meaning when you hear it. And the timing of where it's placed, for sure. And two, I also believe in sort of the vibrational property of the mantra and know that this will be an appropriate mantra for this moment in time.
That's a really interesting topic, the sort of frequencies and how the frequencies affect humans, and that nausea frequency around like 100 hertz, that just, if you get something stuck in that range, and it's really powerful. Sorry, I don't know why I used a negative example there. No, I mean, I love that, and that's a really interesting kind of historical footnote around the creation of Sanskrit. Sanskrit was created not just as a communication vessel, but it was also created as like an energetic transmission tool, and, that is absolutely evident in all the different kind of lineages and traditions of Hinduism and of the yogic and tantric systems,
what's so interesting about that lineage is there is no one lineage. There is no one book. There is no one starting point. They're all so different. One God, 1,000 masks, and they all use different mantras, basically talking about different deities to elicit a different vibrational property. And I've experienced that to be very true. Singing to the mother is very different than singing to Shiva. It's very different than singing to Krishna. And you can really, really feel that if you tap in and drop in, even if it doesn't even matter. Like, what I find so powerful about that style of music and prayer and art form is that it doesn't even matter if you believe in it or not. If you just drop in with sincerity, trust me, you will feel it. Like, I do believe that, whoever came up with Sanskrit all those thousands and thousands of years ago, they were onto something for sure.
Well, it is that changing, like, the matter in your body on the sort of like neurons that will match the frequency of sort of whatever you're being exposed to in certain regions. And I mean, even just myself, like I used to do things like yoga and kind of wellness things, and then I started making music, and I don't do any of that anymore. Like, I just make music. Like, I can not go outside for 5 days, and I cannot see sunlight for 5 days, and I'm fine, because I'm just like, I'm just in it, and it's really well, perhaps concerning sometimes from the outside. But
that really reminded me of a great Ram Dass teaching, a classic Ram Dass teaching. In order to really reap the benefits of a method, you must be free from the method. You must be unattached to the method. And what that means is if you're gripping on too tight to the method, then you are lost in gripping too tight to the method. Then you're becoming lost in some sort of achievement. Like, I'm going to sit down and meditate like the Buddha today for 10 hours, and I'm trying so hard. Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if you like have to do yoga every day, and like or whatever it is.
Do it. And if I don't, I'm not good. I'm not good. And if I don't, sing the Hanuman Chalisa 10 times this morning, and whatever it is, and you have to be free from the method, you have to be free from it. You have to come at it with just a looseness of attachment to it, because, the desire, right? All of the Eastern traditions, right, are all rooted in tempering our relationship with desires, right? But what's included in that is our desire to have less desire. So if your desire to have less desire is wrapped up so tight, then you're caught in the matrix. You're still caught in the cycle. You're still caught in the Maya, and that's, I think, the great rub of kind of the Western adaptations of a lot of these methods is the desire to have less desire.
Well, I mean, I guess specialism is such a thing in the West, right? Like, the whole society is geared towards being specialist.
And individuation as well, being a unique specialist.
Yeah. I mean, is that, but I mean, not everyone is good at all things though, right?
That's what I mean. Like with our education system, it's kind of geared towards like being good at one thing.
Find the one thing you're good at and do that, and you're never allowed to read a novel again unless that's your pathway.
Yeah, or like why are you making music? Like, you're never going to be.
Yeah. I see what you mean. Yeah, I mean that's a tough one, especially in the arts. I think too. It's like the difference between accomplishment and fulfillment, right? Like, when we're so attached to the idea of accomplishment, right, and we fuse that into the arts, right, then it becomes a pursuit of ego, right? Yeah. Like, I really want to become famous, therefore I am going to...
How could anyone want that? I can't understand it at all. I can't think of anything worse.
It seems so bonkers to me, right? But it's like, in today's technology blanket that covers, Western culture. Yeah, when I see that on Instagram and TikTok and all of those things, like their whole idea of influencers, is that everybody's trying to create their 15 minutes, and it's such a bizarre pursuit of satisfaction to me. I don't know.
Do you feel like you were maybe better placed to see it coming than some people, because you were already kind of making media and very aware of what had been thought in the first wave of psychedelic research before this zeitgeist really started to unfurl?
Oh yeah, were you in marketing then?
Yeah, I was in digital marketing and tech, and I think part of one of the great opportunities that I had growing up was being around, probably the single best thing, right? And growing up the way that I did. And I realized how so fortunate I was to be around some of the greatest thinkers and visionaries of the 20th century. And as the late 80s rolled into the 90s, that included some of the great tech visionaries as well. When the internet started to become a little bit more popular and started to become ubiquitous, so many of the great, philosophical thinkers around the internet, got Terence McKenna and John Perry Barlow and Jaron Lanier and Stuart Brand and guys like that, really saw the promise of the internet as this egalitarian tool that was going to decentralize power structures, right? And it started off that way, and it was very effective that way, is that, hey, information can be equally accessible across all parts of the globe, no class restrictions, no economic restrictions. But now, fast forward 30 years, we're seeing it doesn't really work like that, and I think it's look, don't get me wrong, I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I still think that we can use the internet and technology, and we can still disrupt the algorithm in a way where we can hold on to our sovereignty. It takes work, and it takes a level of consciousness to be aware that, the algorithm is not your friend. The algorithm is going to steer you to a predestined reality that was designed for you. Sometimes that can be cool. Maybe, hey, Spotify can turn you on to a cool band that you've never heard of, right? But for most of the time, it's just a marketing vehicle to sell you something. And that is incredibly harmful. It's incredibly harmful. And I think it's incredibly harmful, especially for young people who don't remember the world pre-internet, especially young women, who, I have nothing against healthy sexuality or anything like that. That's all great. And even amazing, right? But, the commodification of it and the disdain and judgment and shame and, cycles that we've kind of built around that are, incredibly troubling.
Do you find that social media comes up in your dreams and in your trips?
It does. It comes up in my dreams. Texting, well, not so social media as much, but texting does. Sometimes I'm texting in dreams.
Actually, I had a dream recently where it's the first one I've had where I was like on Facebook doing something. And I woke up. But I also have a really tedious dreams, normally like miss the bus kind of thing. So I'm amazed it's not come up. Frankly.
I have this recurrent one, which it's really bittersweet because the dream is that I've had a really interesting dream, and then I'm trying to write an iPhone note about it, and that is also a dream, and then I wake up and there's no iPhone note, but the only vivid bit that's remembered is the typing something that I don't get to have.
Imagine if Inception had been based on that principle rather than.
I'm sure it's some kind of internalized version of Inception.
I love it. It is strange though. Like, I'm a little older than you guys, and I do, I do remember a time pre-smartphone, but.
I think we're like the last couple of years, like.
Okay.
Also, I grew up in the north of England. We're about 10 years behind.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I don't remember how I got things done. It's like, all the days pre-smartphone or even pre, like, portable laptop, I don't remember how, we adapted so quickly. Human adaptation and the mutation of what it means to be human happened so fast.
Well, I feel like there's an interesting blend of adaptation and addiction that's gone on with technology, where it's like we've adapted to use it and then we've adapted to need it kind of in the same breath.
Yeah. Oof. It's a tough one because I definitely take a middle of the road approach to it. Like, a lot of people, especially in the greater new age community, are very much can be like unplug, get back to nature, and technology is not your friend and things like that. And I don't necessarily feel that way because, the train has left the station. It's here. It's happening. And I take the approach of learning to make friends with it, and learning to establish, like we were talking about Dharma and spiritual practice, right? What's the heart of any spiritual practice? Equanimity, right? Being in harmony, being in balance with the world around you, being in harmony and balance with your emotions and relationships and your relations and with God. And it's the same with technology. I think it's in our best interest to learn to be in harmony with it and to not fall out of balance. It's not easy, because, we now know that, when you get a new alert on Instagram or even a text message, you get a serotonin boost. It will spark something inside of you that actually gives you a serotonin or a dopamine hit. So these are tough things to wrestle with.
I think I have the opposite reaction. I have a lot of like phone dread, and I was like, oh, no, I have to respond to something now. Which was, I was going to ask that, are people having a nice time when they're on Instagram? Like, do you think people are like, are they enjoying themselves? And it's too much of a good thing, that's why.
Not statistically. I think there are brands that have unpartnered with Instagram specifically because it's known to be causing depression in teenage girls, particularly.
Or like any of them, like, because for me it's like it's like stuff I need to reply to. It's a bit like, okay, I'm just gonna get it over with. Yeah, I don't have to do it for a bit. I don't know if that.
No, I'm on yours. I agree with you. I'm more towards that. When I see too many, even emails, when I see too many emails in my inbox that require my participation, it's overwhelming. I'm like, oh shit, God damn,
I let it all build up until like Sunday sometimes, and then I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna like take these hours on this day to just do it all. By which time many of the things aren't relevant anymore, and like they're like, have you got hot water? Can I use your shower 5 days ago? I wanted to throw in a quick question about creativity and psychedelics. So do you make music?
I do.
What's that process? What do you make?
Well, mainly these days, I'm a bass player by training, I guess. I went to music school and all that. That was my college as a bass player. And I studied jazz theory. And so I'm a pretty good bass player. I do go into my studio and goof around and make kind of progressive ambient tracks or progressive kind of weird things. But I mainly, as far as musically goes, I mainly I play kirtan and sing kirtan, which is, mantra music.
Oh, and is that bassy?
Huh?
Has that got bass in it?
Yeah, I play bass, but also harmonium, to sing the mantras. And I play with some people here locally in Austin and host a kirtan at my house.
Kirtan is a collective activity, right? And is the idea that you can join without necessarily having a particular musical direction that you're going to take, but it harmonizes?
Yeah, the as far as the audience goes, it's very participatory. You sing back what the leader is singing, and you sing the mantra back, so it's call and response. But as far as the actual band goes, the instrumentation and the style of music where you take it can go multiple directions. There are electronic kirtan groups, there are jazz kirtan groups, there are traditional ones, and Yeah, and I kind of find a little bit of a hybrid in all of that. Yeah, I mean, I'm always looking for ways to take mantras and Indian ragas and take them and kind of try to modernize them a little bit, turn them into something a little bit different, you know.
That's great.
Yeah, no, it's super fun. But yeah, I mean, as far as I think you originally were saying, you know, psychedelics, the psychedelic influence on that. I mean, I think that is, you know, I think that's one of the great footnotes of psychedelic history is remembering what, and I think everybody can be served by remembering what psychedelics did to change the face of music. You know, it's like it immediately took music and sent it in a different direction that was previously not heard or felt. I mean, you know, the cultural significance of the Beatles taking LSD and making Sgt. Pepper's or Jimi Hendrix or the Grateful Dead, even if you don't like those bands and listen to them on a regular basis, still the influence that they had on our culture and the Gestalt at large is directly attributable to LSD, you know?
Well, in some ways, like I think it made it more accessible because there's kind of a return to like sonics over like sort of theoretical, you know, that's a kind of traditional harmony. It's like, okay, what does it sound and feel like?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I think, like in terms of like electronic music, that's probably like 90% of the thing that's important is just the soundscape, right? Maybe not 90%.
The soundscape and the textures, right? The textures that are sort of being woven in, because I think people who don't understand electronic music, you know, who haven't quite gotten it yet, you know, the first thing they say, oh, well, it's awfully repetitive, you know? And I think sort of what you're missing in that though is the sonic tapestry and how you weave them in and out and create, you know, more density and then create more sparseness and how all those interrelational sounds work together. I think that's the beauty.
Psychedelics are necessary to a kind of original jumping off into a wider appreciation of the sonic tapestry. Do you think there are parts that you cannot necessarily access without them?
I don't know. It's a tough question to answer. I mean, I can only speak for myself is that, you know, psychedelic, you know, I grew up as following the Grateful Dead around, and what psychedelics did to me in learning how to listen to music, I can never unhear that, you know. And for me, you know, like the first time I did a huge amount of LSD and listened to the Grateful Dead, I remember so distinctly, I could almost remember it as if it were yesterday, how I could hear every single instrument and just on a different track, in a different space, in a different part of the mix, and just isolate each one. And somehow, like, they all sounded so different and that none of them were playing the same thing at all. And how could this work? But then you can zoom in and hear the collective and how it all does work when it's placed together. And that was so beneficial for me. I mean,
interesting that you couldn't do that, even because you're at music school.
Yeah, that was pre-music school, though.
Okay.
That was pre-music school. I mean, I still can. I mean, I'm not saying the psychedelics are a requirement, but it's a really interesting way.
That's how I learned. Like most people can't hear bass unless they are unless it's very obvious, or like they're very dialed into it, or in a kind of psychedelic space. Like, it took a long time to learn how to and even now sometimes unless it's like a.
Oh my, no, it's so true. I mean, my girlfriend who loves psychedelics and loves music, but she's not musically inclined at all. She never really, you know, heard the bass, you know, and now that, you know, I play bass and, you know, anytime we go to a show, I'm kind of listening to the bass lines, and now she's like, oh, wow, now I can hear it. And now I can see why you're paying attention to that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like you can tell when it's wrong. If it's wrong, then it's really, really obvious.
You know, Western music, it's so kind of geared and designed to sort of highlight the front person, like the main focus, whether it's the front man or the lead guitar solo, or something like that. And I think it's such a beautiful experience when you kind of strip away that and you kind of can hear the collective and play with that idea a little bit more. And that's one thing I love about electronic music so much. It's not about the performance or the performer as much as it is the end result.
When I started making music, I didn't realize how important the beat is. And, I was just using like Logic's, like Logic's drummer, because it's whatever, it's just keeping time. And then after a while, I was like, what? Why are all my songs rubbish? Yeah. And finally, I just realized that was the time. We were eating into your day.
No.
Yeah, this has been absolutely amazing. And I guess, any final...
You have an online course on psychedelic.
Yeah, I do. I guess that's maybe the one. That's the one plug I would give is my course starts in late April. And if anyone's interested, please visit zachleary.net. And it's an 8-week course, 2 classes a week. But they're live. It's not pre-recorded content or anything like that. Great way to drop into community, meet other people, and to learn and grow.
Are they kind of like small cohort, like a sort of contained,
pretty small. Yeah, they never get too large, no more than 20 people. And every cohort has its own unique kind of flavor. It really depends on the interaction from others. And I love it. It's been great. This will be cohort number 7 coming up, and please spread the word. Yeah.
What's your kind of intention with the course? What's I guess who's it geared towards?
Well, it originally started, and this is still maybe like the fabric of it. It did start as a course to help people get into facilitation, what it takes to be an effective, compassionate, and safe guide. And that's still, I guess, the backbone. But there are many people who started taking the course who had no interest in doing that and just wanted to learn more about psychedelic culture and history. So it's kind of a fusion of the two. There's a lot of history, a lot of best practices, a lot of science, a lot of, sort of the roots of 20th century psychedelics, how they were introduced to the West, a little bit of indigenous talk, and then a lot of fundamentals around being a guide. What does that mean? What's that look like? Best practices, things to avoid, safety protocols.
It must be a really interesting one to have developed over the last 7 years. And obviously with the pandemic, suddenly loads of online courses sprung up. How did that feel as someone who'd already been in this space with something pre that time? And have you needed to adapt it in the face of more courses arriving?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are a lot of courses out there. Most, the ones that I think are the best ones out there are very intensive, require 9 months to a year of dedication. And thus they're also very expensive, and they're really that is a huge life choice. And there are some great ones out there. Mine is not that. Mine is not, a 9-month, all intensive program. Mine is, I've had a lot of people who have taken my course and done the MAPS training, or taking my course and done Vital by Psychedelics Today or something. And they seem to complement each other pretty well, because my passions and skill sets are a little bit different,
I enjoyed making that song yesterday.
I know, I loved it so much, and I was noticing the piano riff was pretty pronounced. So I was like, wow, yeah. So you have some musical inclination for sure.
I bet you know some place where we could buy a car. Zach Leary, a name we know well. Did your appetite just tailored for you. I bet you any money you can tread the blues. I bet you any money you can tread the blues. Never thought I'd write a song like this. Roz is busy and her words aren't missed. It's kinda stupid but it's not too long. Not too long but kinda stupid too. But it's something that I felt really compelled